Recently, I watched a television show called Standing in the Shadows of Motown, which featured the story of the Funk Brothers. For those who don't know the name, the Funk Brothers were the one musical group who backed every artist and/or group of artists who came out of Motown Records from 1959 to 1972. As pointed out in the program, the Funk Brothers played on more #1 hits than the Beatles, Elvis Presley, the Rolling Stones, and the Beach Boys combined. They were truly responsible for the Motown sound. The Funk Brothers were jazz musicians, experienced jazz musicians who worked regularly with one another, individually and in groups, in the Detroit nightclubs. They were brought together by Berry Gordy to play backup for his singers. As jazz musicians, they were accustomed to using jazz rhythms, 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th chords, and jazz-type melodic fills, riffs, and vamps. They also knew very well how to comp, or how to musically stay out of each other's way, so that when one instrument or instrumental section took a small solo, the other instruments would lay back and instinctively take a supporting role. I'd like to take a look at the Funk Brothers from a musician's perspective to examine and explain some of the ways in which they played. To me, it was these jazz-oriented contributions that gave this already excellent rhythm and blues genre its own unique Motown sound. One song that typifies the Motown sound is Mary Wells' My Guy, written by the great Smokey Robinson. Listen to the first verse of the song as transcribed from the recording. I've used a vibraphone to replace the vocal. Let's start with the fact that in My Guy, Smokey Robinson proves himself to be an excellent songwriter, giving us here a true rhythm and blues piece, but with a couple of unexpected twists. He does this by using a strategically placed melody and harmony that are borrowed from key centers other than the simple B-flat in which the song was primarily written. Take a look at the song, seen here in a simplified lead sheet form, as it would have been written if Smokey had just stuck to the chords that were available to him in the key of B-flat major. We start with a B-flat major triad, which continues until the change in measure 7 to a D minor triad. The D minor triad is naturally occurring, or diatonic, to the key of B-flat major. Listen to how it sounds when we reach the D minor triad. But let's see how Smokey actually wrote it. Notice that when the change comes in measure 7, instead of using an F natural, which is diatonic to the key of B-flat major, he uses an F sharp, which has absolutely no relation to B-flat major whatsoever, changing the D minor triad to a D major triad. A little later, in measure 14, we hear that he has, additionally, changed a naturally occurring C minor to a borrowed C major triad. These changes tell us two things. 1. Smokey simply liked the sound of these two chords. He chose them because those were the chords that best communicated the song as he heard it in his mind. And 2, although there are lengthy explanations as to why those chord choices abide by established theoretical principles, suffice it to say that these particular chords, in this particular instance, not only sound good to Smokey, but sound good to all of us, and more importantly, make sense to our ears. Take a listen to these changes. Now let's get to some of the Funk Brothers' contributions to the song. As I said, the members of the Funk Brothers band were all accomplished jazz musicians. They were very familiar with the sounds and functions of 7th, 9th, 11th, and 13th chords, and used them to enhance the sounds of the more basic triads. In My Guy, the effect of replacing almost every naturally occurring or diatonic rhythm and blues-type triad with a 7th or 11th jazz-oriented chord can best be seen within the song's isolated piano part. This is because the piano part encompasses most of the notes of the 7th and 11th chords, which have otherwise been spread out between the various sections of the band. These 7th and 11th chords tend to fatten up the tonal quality of the basic R&B chords and makes use of them to create and introduce secondary melodic patterns that remain out of the way but that add interest to the supporting background. So, in the following examples, we'll eventually pare everything down to the piano part for examination. The first example of this fattening up of more basic triads comes during the emphatic flourish in the 4th measure, just after the song's introduction by the horns and guitars. Let's look at and listen to how this flourish would have sounded if only the basic triads C minor and D minor had been used. It may be a little difficult to hear the differences when the two versions are played on their own, so we'll listen to the two flourishes in a side-by-side comparison so that the differences can be heard more clearly. The difference between the two versions shows up even more clearly when we remove instruments. We'll zoom in on the piano part for the reasons stated earlier. Let's listen, then, to the two flourishes as they are played by the piano alone. We'll compare them twice, one after the other, to give you a chance to really hear the differences. Notice that the so-called jazz flourish is much richer or fatter in texture than the flourish using basic triads. Although this flourish hits the ear quickly and is rather subtle, it has a big impact on giving the song what is called the Motown sound. Moving forward to the next section, listen to the first half of the first part of the first verse. Again, let's compare two versions. The first version using basic triads, and the recorded version using the more jazz-oriented chords. Zooming in again on the isolated piano part, listen to the differences in the melodies and harmonies when one abbreviated version is played using only the basic triads B-flat and G minor, and the other abbreviated version is played using the more jazz-oriented B-flat major 7th and G minor 7th. In all cases, we will compare the two versions twice, one after the other, to give your ears a chance to become familiar with the differences. Notice again that the 7th chords give the passage a richer or slightly fatter texture. In addition, notice that the melody in the basic triad version does not move. Use of the 7th chords, however, allow for an up and down neighboring movement that is reflected in the horns as well. In the second half of the passage to which we just listened, we hear the first half partially repeated and then make our unexpected excursion into the D major triad. Observe that the guitar and the left hand of the piano outline an up then down D major scale throughout the passage. These tones serve to emphasize the D major triad, but it is really the rhythmic pattern of this little musical figure that serves to continue the jazz feel of the song. Listen to this middle section of the verse. In this instance, the differences between the basic triad version and the jazz-oriented version are very subtle and limited to chords played in the left hand of the piano and on the guitar. So let's isolate those two instruments in order to hear these very subtle changes. We'll compare the basic triad and jazz-oriented versions with the left hand of the piano and the guitar emphasized. First, the basic triad version. Then the jazz-oriented version. And now, playing each twice, we'll compare the two. As you can hear, very subtle differences. Finally, we come to the fourth section and ending of the verse, which segues directly into the same emphatic little flourish that we started with, preparing us for the start of the second verse. As in every other instance, we'll listen to two versions. The first presents this final section of the first verse as it would sound when only basic triads are used. Those being B-flat major, G minor, C major, F major, and back to B-flat major, ending with a flourish using the C minor and D minor triads. The second presents the section as recorded using the chords B-flat major 7th, G minor 7th, C major 11th, A diminished 7th, F major 7th, B-flat major 7th, all leading to and ending on the B-flat major triad, followed, of course, by the flourish of the C minor 11th and D minor 7th that we heard at the beginning of the verse. Again, the best comparison can be made by listening to and comparing the isolated piano part in each of the versions. I think it can be said that the jazz version of this final section is richer, more melodic, and has a more distinctive sound than its basic triad version counterpart. So let's end by listening and comparing again to that with which we began. This time, however, with the knowledge of the subtle differences occurring between the two. First, the basic triad version of verse 1 completed. followed by the as-recorded jazz version of verse 1 completed. Although the differences are subtle, they play a significant role in the creation of a one-of-a-kind sound. I hope you can better understand and hear some of the contributions that the Funk Brothers brought to Motown Records.